Good evening, and welcome to this presentation of the Baltimore County Bar Association on human trafficking. My name is Larry Poland, and I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I want to start by telling you about Alyssa, who was a 16-year-old runaway in Boston who turned to prostitution to survive. She soon fell under the control of a series of pimps. She was beaten and marked on her face with a potato peeler as a means of identifying her as someone's property. She was stomped on. She broke several ribs and 4 of her teeth. She was traded. She was bought and sold by a series of pimps, all of whom made money from keeping her in sexual slavery, and this lasted for a period of years. She escaped only when she turned to the FBI, and then it took many years and the help of volunteer aid organizations to heal her emotional scars and help her to reintegrate into society. She ultimately found healing by helping other individuals who had been taken into the slave trade and managed to escape. This is a comment I want to give you about victims of human trafficking from the FBI website, which is accessible to everyone. They are trapped in lives of misery, often beaten, starved, and forced to work as prostitutes or to take grueling jobs as migrant, domestic, restaurant, or factory workers with little or no pay. We're working hard to stop human trafficking, not only because of the personal and psychological toll it takes on society, but also because it facilitates the illegal movement of immigrants across borders and provides a ready source of income for organized crime and even terrorists. Domestic minor sex trafficking is the commercial sexual exploitation of American children within U.S. borders. It is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act, where the person is a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident under the age of 18 years. In August of 2012, about a week before Alice Bonner brought the idea of doing this to the Baltimore County Bar Association, President Obama addressed the United Nations about human trafficking, emphasizing the priority being placed on this problem by the United States and the need for cooperation among the nations of the world. In this morning's Sun paper, there is an editorial citing an Able Foundation study, and it discusses internet sex trafficking right here. Today, vulnerable young women and girls are still being tricked or forced into selling their bodies to strangers by predatory and amoral pimps who deceive, threaten, and abuse them. But the locus of the stroll has changed from sidewalks to computer screens. A computer-savvy pimp can drive into town with 4 or 5 girls, set them up in a hotel room, post their pictures on the internet, and within hours, 50 or more men may have responded to the ads. By the time the trafficker checks out later that same day, he's put $10,000 or more in his pocket, all before police, even though he was there. Human trafficking, ladies and gentlemen, is slavery. Just as brutal and dehumanizing to victims and debasing to society as the other forms of slavery that have gone on for thousands of years. It's happening now. It's happening here in Baltimore County. We are blessed, however, with dedicated and highly professional, competent law enforcement here in Baltimore County. The State's Attorney's Office for Baltimore County and the Baltimore County Police Department, 2 agencies that are represented here this evening, are 2 agencies that, in my opinion, are among the finest in the state, and I dare say in the country. And probably Mr. Schellenberger is going to quote me in front of a jury the next time I go up against him. But we also have wonderful government officials who are concerned and actively involved. I do wish to thank Baltimore County Councilman David Marks. I want to recognize the presence of Detective, is it Ciapella? Do I have that correct? Newly in charge of domestic violence, I believe, Baltimore County Police Force. The Honorable John Fader, who I've known for a long, long time, Circuit Court Judge for Baltimore County. Josh Greenfield is here on behalf of Delegate John Carden. And my thanks to all of you for being here tonight. I also wish to give special thanks to Alice Bonner, an attorney, member of the Baltimore County Bar Association, vice chair of the Public Affairs Committee, and she was the organizer of this event and with the impetus behind it. I also want to give special thanks to Ms. Doris Barnes, the executive director of the Baltimore County Bar Association, who is an organizing genius. You will learn tonight not only something about the nature and extent of this problem, but what you can do to help law enforcement as well as the victims themselves. Let me quote further from the Sun paper this morning. As more people learn to recognize the signs of trafficking, and as more of its victims decide to flee those who exploit them, the veil of secrecy that masks such crimes is slowly being lifted. I would like to introduce Ms. Terry Ricks, who will introduce our distinguished panel and will be moderating tonight's discussion. Terry has been a community and victims' rights advocate for 20 years. Currently, she serves on the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force as Deputy Chair of the Public Awareness Committee, is a community trainer, and is a member of the Rapid Response Team to support human trafficking survivors. Professionally, Ms. Ricks is the Partnership Coordinator for the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services and is a lawyer. Terry, if you would.
Thank you so much. And wow. I also want to say thank you to the Baltimore County Bar Association, the Baltimore County Commission on Women, for creating an opportunity and space in Central Presbyterian Church for allowing this conversation to happen this evening. It would be really easy for all of us to be at home caught up in a purple haze of glory after this weekend, yes. Or doing many other things, but instead, all of you chose to be here this evening to learn and to open your hearts, your minds, your ears to a topic that, quite frankly, most people don't even want to think about. So, thank you. This evening, I am just delighted to introduce our panelists that are going to share so much information with you. So, just kind of know that you're not going to be the same after tonight, okay? I'm just giving you warning that you're going to look at the world a little bit differently. But our panelists, in the order in which they will be speaking, is we have Jean Alert, who is the Coalition Director for the Maryland Coalition, and she's also Executive Director of the Samaritan Women. And then we also, to her right, have Alicia McDowell, who is Executive Director of the Araminta Freedom Initiative. We also are very fortunate to have with us this evening Major Evan Cohen, who is the Commander of Baltimore County Criminal Investigations for Baltimore County Police Department. And rounding out our panelists this evening is Scott Schellenberger, who is Baltimore County State's Attorney. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to our panelists. I would like to ask everyone if they could please put their cell phones on silence. This forum is being recorded, and we will have a section for questions and answers at the end of all of the different presentations. So with that, Jean?
I have the dubious honor of not only telling you about my organization, but also giving you an overview of human trafficking, all within 15 minutes, which normally takes at least an hour and a half. So buckle up. So what I'd like to do is first set the context for my remarks so that you understand who is this woman and why is she talking to us. In my role at the Samaritan Women, which is a restoration home that we founded in 2007 when we acquired a 23-acre estate in southwest Baltimore, what we do is we serve adult female victims of human trafficking. And so you see a picture up there of the restoration home that we have. I won't go into a whole lot of detail about the program itself, but you see some of the services that we provide to adult female victims. We did open informally at the end of last year and then formally this year, and I am in sort of a twisted way to say we're full. Don't really want to say that. It would be nice to say, gee, we're empty because there's no problem. But someday I hope to be standing in front of you and telling you that that is in fact the case. So what we do on a day-to-day basis is provide for these women, help to restore them back into wholeness academically, vocationally, spiritually, socially, and in terms of their own self-care. We can elaborate more on that individually, and then there's some literature outside. Then we also, because the Samaritan Woman is really on the reactive side of the problem, once victimization has already occurred, we have the Maryland Rescue and Restore Coalition, which is a citizen-led initiative that focuses on the proactive side. So our energy is spent on public awareness, on prevention strategies, on looking at intervention, where can citizens get involved in stopping this particular criminal activity, some work in advocacy, and then also we work to do a lot of education into industries and schools and businesses where trafficking may occur or where there may be supported either knowingly or unknowingly. And so these are the areas of support that we focus on. And if you're interested more in what we do, again, there's literature outside, and we've also just posted our annual report from last year to give you a detail on what we do on the ground with the proactive work. But I'm going to spend the bulk of the time that I have focusing on what is human trafficking so that you have a very practical, concrete definition of this particular criminal activity and maybe even some visual impact so that hopefully it anchors you on many levels. As you heard, the proper definition of the crime of human trafficking is a criminal activity that involves those verbs that you heard already, which is the recruiting, harboring, transporting, provisioning, or obtaining of a person for labor or for services. We don't have the time tonight to go into each of those details, but what I do want to draw your attention to in the definition of the law is that critical point of age 18 or older, because in the United States, if the individual who has been involved in this activity as the victim, if that individual is under the age of 18, that is automatically considered a severe form of human trafficking. What that should mean to you on a practical basis is that you should never speak, nor should you accept in your hearing the terms child prostitute. And so one commitment that you will have leaving here today is that if you ever hear that, you will make that correction, because there really is no such thing as a child who wakes up and says, I'd like to be brutally raped for somebody else's benefit on a repetitive basis. So the law states that a child cannot be prostituted, cannot be a prostitute. The methods are really important for us to key in on too, because the methods that have to be proven in an investigative capacity are force, fraud, and coercion, or in other terms, we're talking about in violence, lies, or threat. Now, this is a real challenge to law enforcement, and so while some of this may make you angry and you may want to say, why aren't they doing their job? I want you to try to imagine, how would you prove that somebody is so threatened that she would do what she would not normally do? How do you know that the oppression in my mind is so great that I believe there is a threat standing over me from another person that I would do something extraordinary and outside of my normal behavior? That's a very difficult thing to prove. And so this is a complicated set of criteria that has to be brought together in order to make a solid case for human trafficking. The purposes are really quite clear. It is for profit or it is for pleasure. It is either labor trafficking, which often is in a commercial, agricultural sense, or it is forced commercial sexual exploitation. And I'm going to focus most of my remarks on the latter because that is the greater portion of the problem here in the United States. But just to give you some visual anchoring of what are we talking about here, we are talking about labor trafficking, as that might be the ladies huddled over the sewing machine, or the men working the fields, or migrant workers, or the children literally who are out on the street who are hawking, whether it's magazines or subscriptions or whatever it may, flowers, whatever it may be. It includes organ harvesting, child exploitation, the pornography of children, and also forced prostitution. In terms of the scope of the problem, I'm going to tell you, and I don't mean this to sound facetious, but I'm going to say, in a manner you could almost quote any statistic you want, because this is really a criminal activity that operates in the dark, and it thrives in darkness and apathy. So we don't really know. That would be like saying, how many people have experienced domestic violence in the home? We don't know. And so this is a crime that we are trying very desperately to get our arms around from a statistical perspective, but it is also one that very often gets miscategorized, or frankly, if we're not educated enough about the crime, we will not identify it as human trafficking. But at least what's being bantied about at this point in time is that this is anywhere from a $32 to $44 billion industry, that there are an estimated 27 million slaves in the world, more than any other point in history combined, that of the slaves in the world today, 2/3 of those are labor trafficked, and that you can see that there are upwards of 2.5 million children who are commercially sexually exploited. So on a global level, this is an enormous crime. This is something that pales, frankly, by numbers in the commerce area only to pornography, which is about a $90 billion industry. So what is the scope of this problem domestically? Because while we can hear about things over there, we often want to bring things as close to home before it's really going to hit us and make a jolt and make us do anything. Human nature is what it is. We don't really know all of these numbers either, but I'm going to share with you what we have so far. For example, of the individuals that are transported into the United States for the purposes of being trafficked, we're looking at numbers somewhere between 14,000 to 17,000. Whether these individuals are being deceived to come into this country for the promises of work, for school, for brides, whatever that may be. The number that is also troubling is that we're looking at upwards of 300,000 American children who are within our own borders being commercially sexually exploited. So children who are being held in sexual slavery within our own country. It has been suggested that the United States is the #1 consumer of human beings worldwide. Now, how do we know that? Well, one, it's not really a stretch to imagine that statistic, because if you look at the discretionary income that we have and where we are as a global economic player, it is quite reasonable to assume that, boy, if we want another Walmart, we're going to have it. And if we want to populate the shelves of that Walmart, we're going to have it. And if you want to have those things that you want, irrespective of what it took to get them, you're probably going to have them. And so the American appetite for goods and for services really does drive a lot of human slavery on a global basis. And so for that reason, we are not only culpable, but we are responsible, and we have a responsibility to get involved. Bringing it even closer, people want to know, well, what's happening here? What's going on in Maryland? I'm excited to say that just this past year, the governor's first conference on sex trafficking occurred in May. And as part of that, there has been a commitment to make a concerted effort to gather data in an organized way so that we can get a better handle on the numbers. That's going to take some time. One of the things that we don't have as a requirement as this state is that law enforcement across the state be trained on this issue. What we do have, fortunately, is some counties have taken the initiative to become much more educated, much more aware, and to staff according to the problem. And so while we do have some counties that are taking leadership roles, we also have some counties that are lagging very far behind. That's significant, so don't put the blinders on and say, well, just because I live in a county where there is that kind of commitment, I'm okay. This is not a crime that respects geographic boundaries. The criminals don't care if you're in Howard County or Montgomery County or Baltimore County, because this literally is a crime that follows the money. It will come to you. And don't make a quick assumption that this is something that just is in that big, bad, dark city, and that as long as you've fled out to the suburbs, you're going to be okay. Because once again, this is a crime that follows the money. And so look at the counties where we have the greatest affluence. Those are also some of the counties where we've seen some real spikes in the drug activity. And I would venture over a period of time, we're going to see that that's where the prevalence of the human trafficking is. In fact, just recently, Detective Dickey of Anne Arundel County mentioned in one of his presentations that Anne Arundel County, particularly the Baltimore, Washington International Airport area, as the third most lucrative destination in the United States for human trafficking. Also, not very hard to imagine, because if you look at it this way, second to New York and Chicago, if you bring a girl into the BWI airport, in one destination you hit several money zones. You hit New York, New Jersey, Philly, Baltimore, and DC in one destination within driving distance, which is unlike having to hit a Las Vegas or a California, San Diego, Los Angeles, etc., which is a much greater expanse. And so by virtue of our geography, we are a magnet for this kind of activity, and also by virtue of our affluence. We also have a number of other conditions that make us very ripe for this kind of activity, not the least of which is our now aspiring goal to have the third largest casino in the United States, which we can just look across the country and see what kind of outcomes we can anticipate from that. There are two resources that I'm going to share with you. We don't have time to go into detail, but if you want to take down the polarisproject.org, this is a national think tank that is gathering data, that is looking across the states at what laws are in place that are establishing a baseline of response to human trafficking, and you can follow their reports to see where Maryland fares. I would strongly encourage you not just to look at Maryland, even though it has a good drill down to counties in terms of where the calls are coming in from, etc., but look at the contiguous states as well, because we really need to look at this as a national problem as well as a global issue. But you can follow up by digging deeper into the report that they publish. By the same token, Shared Hope International, which focuses primarily on domestic exploitation of children, and so you're not going to find information about labor trafficking or the problem as it's associated with adults, but as your heart is moved specifically for this problem as it relates to children domestically, you would want to take a look at the reports that they have published. And here, likewise, they do a much more detailed ranking of the laws within the states on how we both protect children and prosecute those who might exploit and abuse them. Talking a little bit about what is sex trafficking, just to give you a little bit more clarity, we're talking about pornography, we're talking of children, we're talking about the exploitation and prostitution of children, pimp-controlled or forced prostitution, and sex tourism. This can occur anywhere. Again, I don't want you to have blinders on. I want you to really be educated and understand that this is a crime that can go anywhere. One of the phrases that you'll hear often in this is that it is easier to order a human being now than it is to order a pizza. That you literally can have whatever you want and you can have it delivered to your door if you'd like. The internet technologies and the cell phones have facilitated this crime on a level that we haven't even begun to imagine. And so we have to take a look at, it's not just geographically based, it's not just location based, it's not just that corner porn shop down the street where the creepy people are, which is maybe what my 1960s mindset might have been, but this literally can be in the house next door where there's a brothel operating and the neighbors just aren't paying attention to the fact that there's 30, 40 cars coming in there. In fact, where I live in Howard County, there are 4 brothels literally within 2 miles of my home. So they can be fronted businesses, they can be along our major traffic arteries as far as the highways, truck stops, etc. We're looking at the Super Bowl, which is the #1 human trafficking event of the year. Upwards of 30,000 girls can be flown into that destination for the purposes of serving those who are going to that entertainment event. High schools is also an area that we need to pay a lot of attention to. One of the girls that's in our program, for example, tells us that she knows of 4 trafficking rings that are operating out of Howard County high schools right now. And that should not seem shocking to you if you paid any attention to the news. Fairfax County just recently got arrests on the case for Fairfax County High School, where over 800 girls over a 5-year period of time were being prostituted while still going to school during the day. Who are the slave masters of today? Well, the troubling thing is that if you conjure up the idea of a pimp, you might have that sort of stereotypic, it's that image that you have of the guy who has a soundtrack following him wherever he goes and a fedora, totally out of style. Not so much. Right now, a panderer or a human trafficker can be just about anybody. One of the things that you might find incredibly surprising is 50% of traffickers are female. They can be any age, they can be any demographic, they can be from any geography. Really, the only criteria is you have to be willing to dehumanize an individual and productize them, and you have to have greed as your primary motive. So if you are willing to say that who you are as a human being doesn't matter to me, the only thing matters to me is what money I can make off of you, then you might have the credentials to be a human trafficker. There are few studies on who are the individuals in this particular capacity, but one of the studies by the Bureau of Justice Statistics did put forward that predominantly we are looking at males who are in this role in the criminal activity. They can run across a socioeconomic class, but you'll see in this particular report, if you can read that far away, that the ages are actually quite surprising in terms of how young they can be. In fact, there's a category called sneaker pimp, and the sneaker pimp is the one, frankly, who's not even old enough to drive. His job is to work the high schools and the middle schools and the malls and to literally infiltrate and fit in that community and identify the most vulnerable potential victims. Who are the buyers? One of the things that you will find surprising, but an area that is a call for the academic community to really take up this issue, is that Melissa Farley, who leads a great deal of research about prostitution within this country and worldwide, she reports that 99% of the studies that have been done on the issue of prostitution have been on the victims, and only 1% of the studies have been on those who buy. And this is completely upside down because this is a crime where demand is the driver. It is demand that creates the need for the supply. And so we have done very, very little work in understanding the demand and where it comes from and what we can do to arrest it. And I mean that legally as well as in the broader term. So who buys? I mentioned it can be absolutely anybody, predominantly male, any age, any ethnicity. One of the things that is growing in just troublesome is that we are seeing a rise in women who are now buying commercial sex, particularly through sex tourism. And the age of the people who are being bought is getting younger and younger. I'll talk just a bit about the victims. There is a report out that is on the Johns that is really quite interesting in terms of a sampling that was done on their perceptions. And what this report communicated, I'll just call out a couple of things, was that knowing that the girl was forced, knowing that the girl was being prostituted by a pimp, by a third party, had absolutely no influence on that buyer's behavior. It didn't matter. And so we have, and also another element that came out of this report is that their education, there are, for example, some states that have done things called John schools, which is like driver's school. If you get a violation, you go to a sensitivity training on why you shouldn't do this. That from at least the perspective of the individuals who participated in this study, the education had no bearing whatsoever. What they did say, however, as a penalty that was the most strident, a deterrent, was public humiliation and disclosure. That shame was the greatest deterrent. And that when we talk to some law enforcement, both locally as well as nationally, they will say calling their wife is the #1 deterrent to their repeating that particular activity, or getting on the sex offenders registry, which is a 15-year commitment in some cases. So we have to look at what penalties are reasonable and what penalties are really going to have any kind of teeth as we look at this part of the problem. Very quickly, who are the victims? We have a little bit more knowledge on this just based on who is showing up. And what we know about victims is that predominantly we are looking at females, predominantly we are looking at younger girls. The same Bureau of Justice Statistics report indicated that the age of the victim was in the sort of 11 to 17 age in the most predominant category. That what we are seeing domestically is that, while internationally the average age of the most Saleable product is a woman about 18 to 19 years old. Domestically, we are looking at a girl about 11 to 13. So in our country, let me just anchor this, the business proposition is to rape a middle schooler. That's the most lucrative business, is to find a child that you can sell. They are also the most vulnerable. Age is the single most high characteristic of vulnerability, because if you imagine where you were at 11 or 13 years of age and how gullible and how easily you could be persuaded by force, fraud, or coercion. So we need to really do a great deal of effort in reaching into the schools and reaching into the homes where these children are already at risk. Particularly acute are those individuals who are already estranged from some kind of secure environment. So we're talking about our runaways, our throwaways, our walkaways, our foster care kids, those who have been bounced around into different institutions and different types of programs, where there is not somebody who's monitoring why he or she is not at home. If you think of it this way, part of what the trafficker's job is to identify a target, to say, I can sell that. Now, what's it going to take for me to get her to completely surrender her agency to me so that I control her behavior completely? If she's run away, she's already done half of my job for me. Now all I have to do is break her will, and I've got the product that I need and the product that I can sell. So these children are particularly vulnerable. I'd like you to just take this in. This comes from a text by the Salvation Army called The Faces of Prostitution. And the way in which you should read this text is you should read it from the left to the right, because the girl on the left is the same girl as the girl on the right. These are images of girls who have been arrested for prostitution in succession over a period of time. And what this text tells us is that this is one of the most violent ways a person can live. That the individual who is brought into this kind of business is going to be destroyed physically, emotionally, spiritually. You see at the end of this line, and by no means is the right side of this frame her end. She's not going to end up, oh, I'm just going to do this for a little while and then I'll go back to college. I'm just going to do this for a little while. So when we say incredibly foolish things in our society, like prostitution is a victimless crime, or it's between two consenting adults, or perhaps the most foolish of all, she can get away anytime she wants to, why doesn't she just quit? That is devoid of understanding that the forces of oppression that are required to keep her in compliance are so great that choice has been surrendered, choice has been taken away. So we need to not be foolish in our own language, and we also need to help others in a sensitive way understand that this is an incredibly negative trajectory pointed downward. In fact, on average, a woman who is being prostituted will not live past age 34. And a child who is brought into commercial sexual exploitation has a life expectancy of about 7 years. So this is a very short road. The whole point from the trafficker's perspective is find a product you can sell the hell out of it, I can say that in church, and then throw it away, and then go get another one. This is a disposable industry. There is much work to be done, and fortunately the rest of our conversation is going to be what is the kind of work that can be done and where can you personally engage. So I'm excited to pass the podium over to Alicia because she's going to give you some ideas about where you can personally engage in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. I just want to thank her for opening our eyes to the reality of the world that faces our children and women here in Maryland. And while we are focusing on domestic minor sex trafficking this evening, we recognize that these girls' lives don't end at age 18. And so as we talk about domestic minor sex trafficking, we want to remember that these young women these young ladies become young women without options as well. And that's why we're here as a community to talk about what can be done. And we at Araminta really believe that there's a lot of hope in this issue. As much as it is incredibly dark, and sometimes looks like, as Jean said, you're looking into hell, that there is an incredible light that can come into this. The name of the organization that I represent is the Araminta Freedom Initiative. Many of you might be wondering what the name Araminta means. Well, Araminta was actually Harriet Tubman's given name when she was a child slave over on the Eastern Shore. And so we believe that her history and the legacy that she leaves for us as an ordinary woman, a slave, rising up and realizing that there is hope against slavery and that you can lead others to that freedom and hope is what we want to root ourselves in as an organization. And so we're here tonight to talk about what can be done. And we as a public have a role to play in that. Araminta sits on the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force, and I specifically sit on the Victim Services Committee, where we hear the stories about what happens to these young children and women after they are rescued. I just personally, on behalf of the committee, want to thank the Baltimore County State's Attorney's Office, as well as Baltimore County law enforcement, from the FBI to Homeland Security to State Police to Baltimore County Police, for their incredible job at, first of all, making this an issue that is a priority. They have made it a priority, and they are dedicating resources to it, and we are so grateful for that. But they also recognize the importance of collaboration and cooperation through the investigative stage, through the prosecution, as well as for the care of the victims. And they're doing so with a victim-centered mindset, which we are so grateful for on the Victim Services Committee. So we just want to thank you for all of your efforts, and we're grateful for that. So the mission of the Araminta Freedom Initiative is to awake, equip, and mobilize the church and our community to end trafficking in the Baltimore area. And there are 4 areas in which we do this: prevention of the sexual exploitation of minors, systemic economic deterrence of the business of human trafficking, intervention and rescue of those held against their will, and provision of aftercare initiatives that provide healing and wholeness. I want to focus tonight, though, on prevention and systemic economic deterrence, because those are the 2 things that as a public we can engage in right now. We are looking at intervention and aftercare models in conjunction with the Victim Services Committee of the task force to see where the gaps in the response are for children, and providing for children takes a long time to work through. As far as you know, there are state regulations for that as well. So we are working towards that, but I want to talk to you about the public, about the things you can do tonight and moving forward from this presentation to know how you can act in this way. So when we focus on prevention, we recognize that it's not just enough to be aware about this issue of trafficking. We have to take action, and we have to do something as a community, and we believe that we all have a role to play in that. Under prevention, our organization focuses on 3 areas: education and awareness. We have a team that goes out and provides educational seminars to those who encounter children who are at risk for trafficking or who might be being trafficked. We focus a lot of our efforts on the schools. In 2 weeks, we will actually be in the Baltimore County PPW, Pupil Personnel Worker and Social Worker Development Day, presenting to over 200 providers about how do you identify the signs of trafficking in your student population. We've done several of these presentations over the last year with Baltimore County counselors and other schools. And while it's sad to say, we are grateful to say that every presentation we have done, someone has called and made a referral on their children, and that's here in Baltimore County. And while we hate that this is happening to our children, we are glad to know that the information is getting out there to teachers and educators who are the front lines of making sure that these children are identified. A survivor, Holly Smith, who was recruited out of Richmond and sold in Atlantic City, has said that teachers are the front line to this issue, that she knows that her teachers knew that there was something going on, but didn't know what to do about that. And it was her guidance counselor who showed up after the police picked her up in Atlantic City and came to visit her in the hospital. And so we're grateful for our educators. We need to give them the right tools. We also do that with parents and communities. We work with youth group workers to help them identify the signs, because as we know, as Jean said, these children are being kept in their environment. Some are taken out. One of the things that we've seen in Baltimore is that there's sometimes a 3-month period where these children are being groomed before they disappear. And it's the children that we know don't have someone looking for them at home that are the ones who are going to disappear and are going to go to Atlantic City and New York City and the Super Bowl. But a lot of the children are pimped out of their own homes and their own schools as well. So we need to get that information out there to them. We also have a church awareness team that works with churches to recognize that this is an issue that the faith-based community needs to stand up and say. The Bible is full of verses that reference the justice of God, and this applies to this issue today. It's not just something that was for them back in the day that the Bible was written, but it's applicable to us today. And we as a church community must stand up for the justice for these children as well. We also have a training team. It says the AEM training team, that stands for Awaken, Equip, and Mobilize. We believe that ordinary people can be effective in this area, but we want to make sure that we equip you before you go out. One of the most amazing parts of my job is to get to watch people stand up in their everyday role and be equipped to do this work. I'm looking at one of our favorite volunteers who actually acts as an advocate for the girls that are served through our partner agency Turnaround. She has gone to horse equine therapy with the girls and helped support them through that process. She's also a Baltimore County counselor and has educated other counselors about how to identify the signs of trafficking. And so she came through our training and is now using her gifts and skills to actively act in this community. So economic deterrence, as Jean pointed out, money is the motivating factor for this crime, and we have to recognize that. And when we talk about it as a business, it might seem callous, but if we don't recognize that there is greed that is fueling this issue and that there's a large amount of money to be made off of our children, then we're never going to get to the root of the issue. And that's why we have a systemic economic deterrence team that is focusing on the financial aspects of this issue. We're working with hotels and tourism agencies, local businesses, and entertainment venues to make sure that they understand that their venues are being used to fuel the sale of children for profit. And we want to make sure that we're equipping them with the tools to keep it out of their places of business. And for those who will not agree to comply with those, we're looking at the model of the civil rights movement. When businesses who wouldn't hire minorities, that the minorities stood up and said, we will not use your business. And that's the same thing that we're going to do here in Baltimore. So for those hotels and those entertainment complexes who are going to turn a blind eye to this issue, it's the voice of the community standing up and saying that we require for our businesses that we attend to be traffic-free establishments. And that's what we're looking for, is following those models of civil rights in the past to make sure that in this issue we are equipped as a community to have a voice to say that this will not happen, and our money is going to go to those businesses who support traffic-free practices. All right, so if you are interested in getting a specific training in where you work, your church, or your business, you can contact us at Araminta, and we'll make sure that we come out and train your teachers, your church congregants, those in your business on how to keep trafficking out of that, how to identify the kids that you work with if they are being trafficked, and how to keep them safe from the predators of trafficking as well. So our information is up on the screen in case you want to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help you with that. But I want to briefly talk about what you should look for. This is something that we all need to know as a public, or what are the signs of looking for trafficking? And I'm specifically going to talk about domestic minor sex trafficking, because that's what our organization works with. So here are some things that you can look for in the signs of children to see if they are possibly being trafficked. Now let me state that it is not important that you absolutely know whether or not they are being trafficked. These are some signs that you might suspect that somebody is being trafficked. You are not law enforcement. You do not have to know whether or not they are being trafficked. We're just asking that you look for these signs so you know how to make a report and what are some of the things that you can look for. So with females, you can look for a boyfriend who is noticeably older, for bruises or physical trauma, tattoos or brandings. Many of the girls, as has been talked about, are branded in some way or another to be identified by their pimp, that they belong to them. We've seen many girls with tattoos on their arms, on their neck, and on their chest area. So if you're seeing a new tattoo on a child that you encounter, just asking more questions or simply calling the hotline and saying, this is different, I would like somebody to intervene. Sudden changes in their attire, behavior, or material possessions. A lot of times these traffickers will exploit the most vulnerable, and that includes children who are impoverished. And so if they're showing up at school or at your church with more items than you don't know where they came from, that there hasn't been a change in their financial situation, you might want to start asking where those came from. Also, signs of drug addiction. Many of the children are exposed to drugs in order to make them more complicit in the sexual slavery. Also, multiply sexually transmitted drugs. If you are a school nurse or if you are a doctor and you are examining a child and you notice they have multiply sexually transmitted diseases, it is most likely that they are being sexually trafficked. Also, if they are labeled fast by their peers, we have gotten so many calls saying, this is a fast child, I think she is prostituting herself. And as Jean alluded to, that is not possible. There's no child that can physically or mentally consent to being trafficked. And so we want to make sure that we are labeling these girls not as complicit in this, but they are victims and that they are being prostituted, they are not prostitutes. Also, truancy and chronic runaway. We know that they are within 48 hours, 1/3 of children are approached by a pimp or some sort of commercial sexual exploitation. And so we want to make sure that we are watching those children who have a tendency to run away or are continually late for school. Homelessness, signs of gang activity. There are a lot of correlations between gang activity and trafficking in Baltimore. Obviously, gangs are known for their criminal activity around drugs, and they are recognizing that it is a better business model to sell a person than it is to sell drugs or guns, because you do not have to replace your product. You can sell that child over and over and over again. Also, a lack of control of schedule or their identification. Frequent references to travel or other cities, sporting events, conferences, or truck stops. Those are all places where children are either advertised or sold. References to the commercial sex industry language and terms, as well as online chat sites, adult services such as Backpage. If you ever hear a child talking about Backpage, that is a key sign that they are being trafficked. That is one of the main websites that is used to advertise children online. So what can you do if you suspect a child is a victim of domestic minor sex trafficking? This is for the general public. 1, act if you suspect something. Again, you do not need to know whether or not this child is being trafficked, but if you suspicion that there is something going on, just say something. Be watchful and alert. Constantly be looking at. I've had friends who have called me from a Target saying, I just saw an older man with a younger girl. He was touching her inappropriately and he was buying her these items. When they explained what they were buying, it was very clear that that child was probably a victim of some sort of commercial exploitation sexually. So what do? You can call the National Human Trafficking Research Center hotline. This hotline can be anonymous. They're going to ask you some identifying information about what you saw. You don't have to have all the answers. Even if you saw it briefly and you don't know any identifying information about where the child was going, what was going on, that's okay. We still want you to call, because you don't know if the FBI or Homeland Security could be tracking this, that the Baltimore County could be tracking it. So just calling, even if you don't have all the information, but if you suspect something, obviously giving them as much information as possible from what you know is important. But even if it's just, I saw something that just doesn't sit right with me as I was walking down the street the other day. This girl seemed like she was under control. Here's where they were going. Here's what she looked like. And they'll help you walk through all of those questions. But it's important to make the call. We talk about a story where there was a truck stop driver who saw a young girl in the parking lot of the truck stop. He didn't have hardly any information about her, but he called, and it was actually a situation where the FBI had been following her pimp, and just the information that he was able to give actually rescued 8 other girls, even though he didn't have much information. So please make those calls if you suspect something. One of the things that I want to discuss is that due to the law change in Maryland, that the trafficking of a child is now considered child abuse. It's amazing, but it was not considered child abuse prior to this past year. In April, the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force put forth legislation to lobby that it would be considered child abuse, and so that those children would be served under the child abuse directives of the Department of Human Resources. So one of the important things to recognize is now that child trafficking is considered child abuse, as mandated reporters, you are mandated to report when you suspect that a child is being trafficked. So I want to address that. If you are a mandated reporter and you suspect that a child that you come across is being trafficked, we would like you to call the Department of Child Protective Services, and the number that's on the screen is the Baltimore County Department of Child Protective Services. So that's exactly where you would call. Again, you will be giving the same information that you would give to the national hotline, but if you know the child, just expect that you're going to be on the phone for a little bit longer, because they're going to be asking you more information than if it was a child that you saw out somewhere that you don't know. But please call that, as the Department of Social Services is now equipped to handle these cases. Also, call the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, because that connects also to the FBI and law enforcement, Homeland Security. They will connect it back to the local police, and it might be a case that they have been looking at, and it might just connect those dots. So please still make that report to the National Human Trafficking Resource Center as well. And you can also call local law enforcement. There are different vice officers that are assigned through the different initiatives to respond to this, and they will make sure that that is handled, because we want to make sure that we're not just serving the victims, that we are also going after prosecution, which they will get to in the next two presentations as well. So please call those 3 numbers if you're a mandated reporter. All right, so if you are ready to get involved, and as a community member ready to take a stand and say, I don't want this happening in my backyard, and what can I do? Here are some things that you can do. One, we have Lobby Day coming up on behalf of the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force Legislative Committee. They're putting forth a bill on asset forfeiture. In drug trafficking and in weapons trafficking, there are what's considered asset forfeiture laws that mean that the traffickers, once they are convicted of trafficking, the assets that they made off of selling those drugs or guns are seized and taken from them. However, we do not have this here in Maryland, and so therefore, those who sell children and women get to keep all of the money that they made off of these children and women. So we want to make sure that that does not happen, and that the money that was made off of their exploitation goes back to their care and law enforcement. What will happen with the funds that are taken from traffickers who are convicted is that those funds will go towards victim services and towards law enforcement. In Maryland, we have a law that allows wiretapping for the local law enforcement to use that, but they don't have the resources to utilize that to the level that they would like to. This will give them the funds to do that, as well as the funds to serve the victims, which is a desperate need here in Maryland as well. If you are a community member and you want to start to get involved and you want to learn a little bit more about this issue, Araminta has what we call community action nights, where you can come out and hear more about our organization and all of the ways that we engage the public. It's a little bit more extensive than what we went over here tonight, but it's a great way for you to understand all of the different ways you can get involved, whether through a volunteer training or immediately leaving that evening. If you're ready to get involved, we ask that you go through a volunteer training. We have several high-level things that you can do. As I mentioned, we have women who act as mentors and advocates to the women and girls that go through the turnaround program. And if you're interested in that, we would be happy to have you join us, but we would ask that you go through a volunteer training first so that we can equip you to do that to the level of excellence that we want to serve these girls and women with. And so we have 2 volunteer training opportunities that are coming up. There's a condensed weekend training February 8th and 9th. We do ask that you do a little bit of pre-homework for that, just because it's an intense amount of information. We want to make sure that you're prepared for that as well. But the registration for that is open on our website, and you can register for that within the next 2 days. We close it just to make sure we give you enough time to complete that homework before you come. And we have a 5-week training course that doesn't require homework before you come, because we take more time with the issue and get to spend more time with you. And that's for 5 Thursdays beginning on February 28th. So we would love to have you join us if you're ready to jump right in and volunteer on one of the teams that I mentioned and some of the other things that I haven't been able to mention tonight. So our information is on our website, and if you have any questions, you can always email us at contact@aramintafreedom.org. We also have brochures and flyers in the back with the information about the action night, as well as the volunteer training. So thank you for your time, and I am excited to pass on the mic.
Wow. The past 2 speakers really covered a lot of information, a lot of which I also was going to cover, so I can be brief. But the point is about what they both brought up is it goes to show you how we're all in a partnership to address these important issues. Chief James Johnson couldn't be here tonight, and it's my pleasure to represent him tonight to talk about this subject. And what they want me to talk about is the resources that we have that investigate human trafficking. I'd like to say that we have 1,908 officers that are out here on the streets looking at human trafficking. 1,908 is what our authorized strength of the police department is. And what we like to do is get out there, and as mentioned before, we want to get our officers trained what to look for. Our officers out on the street are the general practitioners. Every time anyone calls 911 or they're out there patrolling, they're on the streets. They're responding to calls. They see different things that are going on. As with Homeland Security issues, we train these officers to be aware of evidence and indication of other underlying issues or crimes that they may witness while in their patrol duties. For instance, if an officer may go to a call just for disorderly subjects, but when he gets there, he sees indication of human trafficking. We often find these, I guess our biggest problem with human trafficking that we've uncovered so far in Baltimore County recently are the Asian massage parlors. This has been in the media, and we have detectives that are looking into this. But for example, an officer may go to a call, an alarm call or disorderly call, or who knows what kind of call at a place, and they may go in and they may see a lot of cots, a lot of beds in a back room, may see people kind of in an atmosphere that's just not proper for a house or a business. It should ring a bell with them, and this is what we want to train them to do, to come back, to discuss it with our detectives, to bring them out if they need to come with our partners and talk to them and help them come out, our advocates, our victim advocates, to come out and speak with the folks there. Often with these massage parlors, we have issues with language barriers. Oftentimes they are not amenable to talk to the police. They're scared of the police. They're threatened that if they get hold of the police, that they will be deported or get in other kind of trouble. And that's why we have our advocates to come out and help us with that. I want to talk about our first unit. We have several units that are also dedicated to more specific investigations that would target human trafficking. First, I'll start with our Vice Narcotics Unit that deals with prostitution complaints and other complaints of that nature. They deal with the adult victims. And as mentioned before in the opening, internet prostitution. As mentioned over here earlier, Craigslist, Backpage, all of these are indications. If you see people on them, if you see children on them, it's an indication that human trafficking may be involved. Our detectives tell me they can come in, they can go right onto Backpage, right onto Craigslist, and within minutes, every day, they can come up with prostitution complaints, massage parlor complaints, and so forth. While we only have a handful of detectives in these units, it's the partnerships we have with local and federal agencies that give us kind of a force multiplier to be out there combating these problems. I don't want to overwhelm you with acronyms and a bunch of initials here, but I'll give you a couple of them. The MCAC Center, which is the Maryland Coordination Analysis Center, is a fusion center that was put together after the 9/11 attacks. What we realized is while asking people if you see something, say something, with Homeland Security and terrorist issues, it also came into regular crime issues. Hey, I see a lot of people coming in and out of this business. It just looks unusual. I see people going into these houses and a lot of traffic coming in. What's going on with that? And hopefully people will call into the MCAC Center if they're not calling 911, talking to their local police or other contacts that they have, and it tells us, hey, we need to look at this. It could be an indication of Homeland Security issues. It could be an indication of human trafficking issues. This is what we want to help the public help us with, as well as all our officers, as I mentioned before, that are out on the streets. Through this Coordination and Analysis Center, they take the efforts of federal, state, and local agencies to gather, analyze, and share intelligence information with law enforcement, public health, and emergency responder personnel. Baltimore County has two detectives that are assigned to work in this fusion center. We also work with ICE and the FBI Exploitation Task Force. The ICE Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, is responsible for investigating a wide range of domestic and international activities arising from the illegal movement of people and goods into, within, and out of the United States. They investigate immigration crime, human rights violations, and human smuggling. along with this, we work with code enforcement, we work with zoning. For the massage parlors, which I'm concentrating on a little bit, there's more than just the police approach. We kind of look for the holistic approach. We work with the Maryland Board of Chiropractic and Massage Therapy examiners that license these legitimate massage parlors. We work with the fire department for fire code violations, and as mentioned before, zoning and code enforcement. Along with this, we have our partners, some which have been mentioned already, and I hate to miss any when I talk about them. Turnaround has been a great aid to us. They not only help us with victims of sexual assaults, but also with human trafficking in victims. Hopefully they can, as we said, any that are intimidated by police, they hopefully can work with them, find out what's going on, and we can get them to a safe haven. As I said before, we're looking to train our 1,908 officers on human trafficking. The Maryland Police and Correctional Training Commission, MPTC, they commission and oversee training of police officers. They mandate every year that we go to in-service training, that our officers go to in-service training. They dictate some of the courses that are going on, but Baltimore County recognizes the human trafficking issue is so serious that we've allocated a block of time for every officer in the department to be trained on human trafficking. They'll teach them what to look for, indications of human trafficking, whether they're adults, juveniles, they're being keyed in as to what to look for. Just some of the indicators that they may look for: subjects whose passports or other identification are being withheld or held by other people. Of course, what they're doing is they're taking somebody's passport. They're saying, until you earn us a certain amount of money, we're not going to give you these passports back. You're not free to go until you work off what we need you to do. And of course, this is through sexual exploitation. We're looking for the need to debrief and look at runaways, juvenile runaways. Juvenile runaways are often susceptible to these older people that want to take them in, profess love to them, treat them as a father or a boyfriend, and then wind up using them for sexual exploitation. Again, when we talk about, we want to educate them through people meeting through Craigslist, Backpage, or other similar websites. Our next unit that also helps us key into this problem is our Crimes Against Children unit, and they handle, obviously, what used to be called family crimes and now crimes against children. They're located out of our Drumcastle Center at York Road in the city line, the former Caldor or Stewart's, if you go back far enough. They deal a lot with runaways. They share information with social workers who work hand in hand with them to speak with children. They examine their surroundings. Again, frequent runaways, children that are in foster homes, that don't have that solid parental supervision to know when their moods change, when things change, when there are other people in their lives that just doesn't add up. Again, maybe a young child being with an adult or older person that, again, just doesn't look right. And they can key off this and look into it a little bit further. We get tips from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. NCMEC is what often people talk to it. It's a nonprofit organization that serves as the nation's resource on the issues of missing and sexually exploited children. The organization provides information and resources to law enforcement, parents, children, including child victims, as well as other professionals. One thing I read about this is, if your car is stolen, it goes into NCIC, and anybody that runs that tag throughout the United States will find, hey, this car is stolen, let's stop it. But there wasn't one for children that are stolen or run away and are with people that they shouldn't be with. And that's what this NCMEC helps with. And again, we're in partnership with them. And as mentioned earlier, we understand that police work in Baltimore County just doesn't stop at the city line and the Pennsylvania line and other lines. We understand that these crimes cross jurisdictions, and it's important for us to partnership with other local law enforcement and federal law enforcement to combat these problems. An estimated 800,000 children are reported missing each year, more than 2,000 every day. An estimated 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 10 boys will be sexually victimized before age 18, yet only 1 in 3 will tell anyone. This is where we need to develop rapport, relationships, have our officers key in on these children that may not be willing to talk to them. We can help through our advocates, through our social workers, turnaround, and other agencies that help us. We have somewhere around 62, I think it is now, school resource officers in schools in Baltimore County. They're in our schools for various reasons, but one of them is to mentor and build rapport with students, to see police officers more as people, as friends, as mentors, as opposed to just a badge or someone that's out to get them. Hopefully, in that atmosphere, we've trained our SROs to look for this type of behavior, for people trying to lure them, or maybe other students that are willing to talk about their friend who has run away and is now in a bad situation, and we can help out. Again, our detectives in these units have received a lot of training through NCMEC, through various conferences, and now the Baltimore County Social Services folks are training along with our officers so that they even can understand the problems even more. Another unit we have, and this was mentioned also, is our legal section. We have officers and attorneys that are involved in the session down in Annapolis and help support some bills. We have testified in Annapolis and worked with the Polaris Project, which was mentioned, for the bill concerning posting of the National Human Trafficking Resource Center hotline at any bus station and truck stop in the state. Again, the thought is if there is someone that's brought in human trafficking, and obviously a natural stop would be a bus station or a truck stop, and they see these posters and they're looking for help and they just don't know what to do, here's a number to call, and hopefully we can get the resources to them. We also help support the wiretapping and electronic surveillance investigation of human trafficking, which added specified human trafficking offenses to those crimes for which evidence may be gathered by interception, oral wire, or electronic communications. Our officers went down again after speaking with Polaris to support this on behalf of law enforcement. We also previously worked for legislation which allows for expungement of records for those that may be charged with prostitution who are later determined to be the victims of human trafficking. And one of the things we want to teach our officers and our detectives are aware of, on its face it may look like we have somebody that's guilty of prostitution and they're the bad people and we need to arrest them. But after debriefing them, talking them, it may be that they're being held against their will, that they're doing this under coercion. And we need to understand that and debrief these folks and not just treat them as victims. And again, if they happen to be charged with prostitution and it's later found out that they were against their will, this bill now allows for their records to be cleaned. As mentioned previously by Araminta, unsuccessful, we've been in passing legislation for asset forfeiture, which we also did testify to, but was unsuccessful. And hopefully down the road, we can continue looking into that area. One more thing I'd like to talk about. We're all about statistics and gathering data in the police department, as I think everybody is nowadays. The FBI has the Uniform Crime Reporting, which you may have heard of, which is called UCR. It's a nationwide cooperative statistical effort of nearly 18,000 city, university, college, county, state, tribal, and federal law enforcement agencies, basically all the police out there, in gathering statistics. Implementation of new UCR offenses for human trafficking is beginning in 2013. So we will be able to gather data on human trafficking so we can report it out and people can analyze the problems, and maybe it'll also add to the awareness throughout the country for those police departments that don't believe that they have a problem. The last thing, and this was mentioned before too, how can the public help? And what I say, as I said earlier, as with Homeland Security, there's the need for members of the public to adopt that same see something, say something motto when it comes to human trafficking. Any indications that were discussed earlier that you have, call 911, talk to a police officer on the street, call one of the agencies that you have the number. We need to encourage business owners to report suspicious activities from maybe adjacent businesses, massage parlors that are in an office building. They see unusual traffic that would be indicative of possible human trafficking. Let us know. And again, as mentioned earlier, hopefully we can work with hotel, motel employees and management to report activities and not allow future illegal activities in their establishments. One of the things we understand as police is the need for us and the community to work together. We understand we can't do it by ourselves. I talked about the 1908. That's nice, but if we could have the over 800,000 people that live in Baltimore County taking a look at these problems, being keyed on what's going on, and contact any of these groups sitting at the table, whether it's the police, whether it's our school officers, whether it's the pupil personnel workers in the school, or anyone. That's what we want to do and work in partnership to help this alleviate this problem of human trafficking. Thanks. Scott.
So, as I'm sitting there for the last hour thinking, I must not be a very smart politician, because no smart politician would go forth in a 4-panel discussion about a conversation and a topic, since a lot of things that we've talked about already are on my prepared remarks, so I'll go fast. Just so we're clear, I am here to say publicly that it's not just the advocates who are out there, crying that this is a problem. This is officially a problem here in the state of Maryland, in the United States, and yes, even here in Baltimore County. And just an indication, let me read to you a few of the headlines that have been in the newspapers just in the state of Maryland within the last 3 years. A New York pimp was indicted in Maryland for sex trafficking, kidnapping, and gun crimes. A DC man indicted for transporting a minor to engage in prostitution in Maryland. A Frederick man sentenced to 10 years in prison for sex trafficking of a minor. Upper Marlboro couple charged with domestic servitude of a woman. A Glen Burnie man sentenced to 10 years in prison for transporting a minor to engage in prostitution. An Easton brothel worker pleads guilty to transporting prostitutes over state lines. A Montgomery County man sentenced to 30 years in prison in sex trafficking conspiracy. A U.S. Army soldier sentenced to 17 years for operating a brothel in Millersville. 3 conspirators sentenced to a total of more than 40 years in prison for a sex and drug trafficking. A 3rd Ohio man pleads guilty to sex and drug trafficking. I didn't make any of those up. They appeared in either the Baltimore Sun or other Maryland newspapers in which individuals were prosecuted here in the state for just what we've been talking about here today. They're just some of the headlines that I was able to pull by doing a very simple internet search just last week. It's something that happens here in Maryland, as we've seen, and as obviously you've demonstrated by coming here tonight. It's something that we should all care very much about. As we said, unfortunately, the average citizen views these crimes as simple prostitution and blames it on the person who really is too often the victim. And the problem is particularly bad, obviously, when you're dealing with individuals who are minors. Human trafficking in Maryland is not just a problem because it's a problem all over the country, but it's a big problem because of simple geography. When you look at I-95 running up and down the East Coast and see how easy it is for Maryland to be a stop-off point, whether it's the hotels or BWI airport area or the truck stops, it's just a product of the fact that geography makes for good business. Also, Maryland has a number of impoverished communities right next to wealthy communities, which is kind of a very bad dynamic when it comes to human trafficking. Human trafficking is actually the 2nd largest criminal industry behind drug dealing. Number 2, right behind drug dealing when it comes to money. But I have to candidly admit to you, these are very difficult cases to prosecute. We liken them very much to domestic violence cases, where we go to the victim, we try to convince the victim that, we are here to help, but very often the victim feels trapped and is reluctant to help. Unfortunately, the laws and the Constitution in the United States is still such that I have to put witnesses on the witness stand. And a lot of times our victims are very, very reluctant to cooperate. Part of that is because they've usually been in their situation for a very long period of time, maybe since they were very young, and therefore they're used to being manipulated, and they're very difficult to make them understand that they can be safe. This is where our partners in the private sector are so very important. And we do have an excellent partnership here in Baltimore County. We're not perfect, but we try very hard to all work together, both the government and the private industry, in order to try and advance for these goals. The other reason that our victims are often difficult to put on the witness stand or difficult to get to cooperate is because they are usually hard to get emotionally pulled away from the people who control them. Either if they've been with them for a long time or they've been controlled for such a long time, it's very difficult to pull them away. In addition, when you put on the fact that a lot of them unfortunately are addicted to drugs, either as a way for the traffickers to control them or as a way for them to kind of escape reality, it makes it very difficult for us to use them as witnesses. And as always, and all four of us have said here today, and I'll just do one more time, awareness is the key, and your presence here today is very important. The majority of human trafficking cases start at the local level, but most of those headlines that I read to you were from federal court. And that's what happens is, a local citizen, a local patrol officer will stumble across something or come across something that his training has taught them he needs to follow up on. And the next thing you know, we're in the midst of a major investigation concerning a human trafficking ring that just doesn't take over Baltimore County or other parts in the state of Maryland, but takes over other states. And that's why it's very important that our U.S. Attorney's Office in Baltimore is very actively involved in this endeavor, because they have the jurisdiction and tentacles to reach very far and wide in order to prosecute these individuals. And I might add, parenthetically, they get a whole lot better sentences than we do down in the federal court. Patrol officers, emergency room workers, social workers, teachers, all the folks that you heard about today are really in the front lines in dealing with the individuals who are the victims of this crime. In Baltimore County, it really is the massage parlors and those kind of places that seem to be a place that we have kind of recurring problems, and it's something that we take very seriously here in Baltimore County. Our police officers are trained. We have special police officers who work very hard in this area. Truck stops are very much havens for these kinds of things, and that's an area where we see recurring problems. You, the citizens, though, can really help. If you have a house in your neighborhood that your neighbors complain about, there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of people going in and out all hours of the night, that can mean one of two things. Either one, there's human trafficking going on, or two, there's drug dealing going on. And very likely there's both. So, you got to make that phone call. 911 calls can be anonymous. They can be anonymous in Maryland, and particularly in Baltimore County. I'm a person, I live on Covered Bridge Road, there's a house across the street, 9110, I'm seeing a lot of activity, no, I don't want to give my name. And what will happen then is our police department will begin an investigation just based on that. And they can then go and watch themselves. They don't have to rely on your testimony. Or they can do undercover activity or some of the other things that we talked about, the expansion of the wiretap laws and things like that. So it's your phone calls that can make a difference in Baltimore County. And of course, as already mentioned, missing children and the fact that Baltimore County is the home to a tremendous number of foster homes is a particular problem here in the county. Homelessness, runaways, they're always the perfect target. Our street gangs, as we just learned, are also finding that this is a very lucrative trade. So these are places where they all have to go. I would encourage you, not on your work computer, but on your home computer, to take a look at Craigslist and Backpage, and there's also USA Sex Guide, to look at these web pages and see that this is really going on in our neighborhoods here in the county. Because it is. It's really happening there. And when you take a look at this, you'll not only be shocked at the number of listings that are there, but so many of them that are so close to home. And finally, a couple potential signs of trafficking of a victim. Very often they appear malnourished, have poor personal hygiene, the sexually transmitted diseases, the bruising, the broken bones. We just need to ask these questions. A lot of them suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and psychological disorders. As we already said, often doesn't hold their own identity papers and suffers from abuse of both the physical and verbal kind. In Baltimore County, we're active participants in our task force. We try very hard to engage with our partners and stay active in these things. And as I said, our federal partners are particularly active. I'm very fortunate that I have a young prosecutor named Amanda Walker Rodriguez who took her own individual initiative in this area. She came to me and said that she wanted to specialize in this, volunteers her time to be on the task force with these folks. And we're very fortunate to have young, dedicated prosecutors in my office who really care about this issue. I thank you all for being here tonight, and I told you I'd be short.
Wow. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for just an insane amount of information that you shared with us. And this is one of those topics that we literally could spend hours and hours, days and days, weeks and weeks talking about this. I just, as a housekeeping kind of thing, I wanted to let you know that we did start the public forum a few minutes late. So with your indulgence, we would like to take an opportunity to answer a few questions from the audience. We're not going to have a ton of time, but just to get 2 or 3 questions from the audience. Yes, ma'am, could you stand up so we can hear you? Oh, great, a mic.
Okay, is this better? Okay. I'm a Baltimore County Department of Social Services social worker, and I potentially have someone that could potentially be in this population. But I also had in the past have worked with homelessness in Baltimore County, and the affordable housing is horrible. And so when you talk about the Samaritan house is full, I think in my head, well, you know, I could report this, but she may lose her home. So, I mean, in the process, but so are there places, is there housing for people who would need it if necessary?
Well, I'll jump in, and then perhaps Alicia will as well. So this is my opportunity to have a little brag. So Friday, Natalie Grant, the Christian music singer, came to our restoration home to spend some time because she's very active in this issue. And she was able to spend some time with the ladies and tour the property. And as a result of her visit, she announced today that she is actually gifting us with a grant to expand our bed capacity. So be encouraged. But there are also Safe House of Hope, for example, puts girls in host homes, and Turnaround has the provision to provide for some housing as well. It is an area of desperate need, however. So do not let those 3 give you any indication that that covers the entire Mid-Atlantic region. We need people who are going to step into this role. Now, there are also agencies who are beginning to take this issue for minors as well, and so we hope to see that on the horizon very soon. But as of right now, there is not a long-term restorative care program for minors. We have a long way to go.
I'll just answer as well. Our Victim Services Committee is well connected with other agencies around the nation that provide housing. We've gotten really creative, especially with our minors, and sending them to other programs because we don't have many options here in Maryland, but we do have connections with other placements as well. So don't hesitate to reach out to those on the Victim Services Committee because we can work through that. We also, as a Victim Services Committee, will be working with the Department of Social Services as the regulations have changed for child abuse to help kind of work through some of the issues that you're talking about. So you'll be seeing training coming through your department as well from the task force. So.
Thank you. Another question? Yes.
Yes.
And then we'll go there. Okay. I think you turned it off.
Did I turn it? It's
Oh, no,
on
you're
now.
good.
There it is. Hi, my question is directed towards the law enforcement community. And one question I have for you is in regard to arrests made, when we talk about brothels and Asian brothels and those kind of things. I had a tax business in an area where I saw come in and out, and you knew it was human trafficking. But each time, officers would come in, make the arrest. 6 months later, the business opened back up. Officers come in, make the arrest. 6 months later, and to this day, that brothel is still in operation. The business is a rental company that rents to them. I had two questions. How often does law enforcement have laws on the book to enforce this towards business? Question number two, how many arrests are made of Johns that are going into these businesses and using them? Are the arrests usually made on Johns, or would you say there's more of a higher percentage of arrests of victims? And if so, why? We held something similar to this in Howard County at Bridgeway Community Church. And what we found was officers were not truly trained. They got up and spoke and said, you know, we don't really know what to look for. So another thing is, what is that training involved? And if victims are definitely not going to want to speak to police officers, that's very clear, because they know, they are automatically told by their pimp or whoever's trafficking them, that's the last line that they're going to speak to an officer. How are those issues handled?
Well, let me see if I can remember them in order. So, as far as going into a business and, you know, making arrests, and then months later another one, and months later another one, there is a type of crime called a nuisance crime. It's a very old kind of crime that could be used against the landlord. But I can honestly tell you, they're very difficult crimes to prove. A lot has to do, you know, of course, the law and the criminal law is mainly based on knowledge. And knowledge is what gets you in trouble as far as a crime goes. And so it is very difficult to sometimes prosecute the landlord for a nuisance crime. However, after we're done here today, I'd be happy to give you a card. If you want to give me the address, I'd be happy to work with the major to see if if there's anything there that could be potential. The second issue that I think the major can also speak to after I finish is, how often you arrest the Johns and the people who are going in. Again, this is a very difficult area of the law. Because it's against the law, and I'll have to use the old word because it's on the books, but because it's against the law for prostitution, either to solicit as the person or to sell, you need someone to be your witness. And the law also says that you need corroboration independent of another criminal. So in other words, if two of us go in and rob a bank, I can't just say, oh, he did it with me, and not have independent proof other than the scuzzball that he did it with me. And unfortunately, human trafficking is the same way. So they're very difficult crimes to prosecute because typically there are only two people in the room, and typically both of them have committed a crime. And in addition to that, both of them have a Fifth Amendment right not to testify against the other. So unfortunately, they are very hard crimes to prosecute in that way. But we are trying to get more inventive, to try and get more open-minded and more into this century about how we think about these things, which is, I think, evidenced by the fact that we're here tonight. Those are just a couple of my thoughts on that issue. I don't know if you can speak to how many arrests we make.
Right. I wanted to go back to your other point about the location and that the officers kept going back, the detectives kept going back, and then it reopened. Some of these locations are obviously rented. Then we can get to the landlord, we can get to the business owner and all, and usually through pressure, we're able to close them down. There have been a location or two that are actually owned by the people involved. And for them, it's just as lucrative to pay the fine or whatever and then go back to their business. However, this is where we're learning, again, to be more inventive and partnering with code enforcement, with the fire code people, with the licensing boards to try and shut them down.
We had a question back there. Yes.
This is a quick comment. I'm a member of the Legislative Committee of the Maryland Human Task Force, and I'd like to underscore what Alicia said about the Maryland Lobby Day, particularly to support the asset forfeiture bill. There are some flyers outside, probably not enough for everybody, but if anyone is interested, and also if you're interested in taking the legislative route, please consider calling your own legislators during this session of the Assembly and tell them that you would want the asset forfeiture bill passed. It's going to be a very tough sell in the Assembly, and it needs all the backing it can get from citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll take one more question, this gentleman here.
First, if I might, I just want to make a comment. Some years ago, I saw on TV, I noticed in one of the slides that it mentioned Atlanta being one of the highest areas of human trafficking in the United States. And I saw a thing on TV some years ago about that very fact. I was so moved, and actually my senses were offended by the knowledge that this went on in the States, that I tried to contact a couple of the organizations that were highlighted to ask who I could talk to in Maryland, because it must happen everywhere, and no one ever got back to me. So I want to just really commend you for bringing us all together and doing this tonight and generating the sense of awareness. That having been said, I have a couple of questions because this is so new to me. The first one is, I guess I'll address it to Terry and Alicia, who both mentioned about being, and I'm going to try not to use the word prostitute because you said not to, being trafficked out of their own home. In other words, a child, a teenage girl who's essentially sold out of her own home. And my brain says, how is that possible? In other words, if you're living home with your parents or guardian or whatever, how does someone get their hooks into you so that they could take advantage of you to such an extreme? If one of you might answer.
One, I will answer that there is a form of trafficking called familial trafficking, where parents will sell their children for either their basic needs if they're impoverished. You know, we've heard stories of girls being exchanged to the landlord in exchange for rent, so that they would have sex with the landlord in order to not have to pay rent that month. For drugs, we've also heard of parents settling bets or debts with other people with their children. So familial trafficking does happen. We generally see that it happens within the elementary school years as well as the middle school years is when it generally begins. So when we're focusing on elementary schools and early middle school, we always talk about familial trafficking because that does happen. You asked how could it happen that somebody traffics a child when they're living at home with their parents. There are girls in Maryland who have been recruited at malls, who have been recruited out of their high schools, who you know, might be presenting with to their parents as having, you know, just some difficult times, whether they're not behaving. Part of this goes with the psychological coercion that happens from a pimp or a trafficker. What you need to understand is that these young girls are exploited through their hopes, their dreams. You know, 14-year-old girls who are told that they're beautiful and that they could be a model, what 14-year-old girl isn't going to be excited by that? And these pimps are master manipulators. So unfortunately, it is easy for them to be picked up at a mall, to be going out with their friends. A lot of times they're trafficked with their friends as well. You know, they're trafficked at what's now called skip parties. Traffickers will advertise skip parties at high schools where you skip school for a day. You recruit your friends, you go to the party, and then girls are turned out, which is their first time of being trafficked that day. So that is how it's possible. There's a lot of manipulation that goes into that. Our more extensive, you know, community parent awareness trainings go into what that looks like as well. But thank you for asking, because it does very much happen. And it's not a reflection on the parents being neglectful. It can happen to any child. And we have a really good partnership with Turnaround, and they do work with families whose children have been trafficked who were not a part of the trafficking, so, okay.
Thank you very much.
If I could just add to that, about 90% of the women that we serve were trafficked as children, the youngest at age 4. On average, we see about age 8. So it starts within the context of a home setting, with the exception of one gal we've had so far who was institutionalized, and she was actually being pimped out by the juvenile justice operator. And so it starts very, very young. So 2 things on that. One, we must do a tremendous amount of work to reach children much younger and to be much more vigilant about children who are in high-risk categories. And 2, we need to soften our perspective of judgment against the woman, because we do not know her trajectory. We do not know where she came from. And in most cases, what we're looking at when we see a 22-year-old who's advertising herself is a girl who at 13 had that done for her. So I thank you just so much for allowing what I would call your holy discontent. And for the rest of you too, I hope that there is a part of something tonight that just bothers you tomorrow and the next day and the next day, and you can't shake it. Because then we know that something we did here planted a seed. And it will bear fruit in however you choose to take it. But my only ask is that don't deny it. You know, don't just suppress it and say, ugh, I don't want to think about it. You're thinking about it for a reason, because we need you to move.
Yes, and we're going to have Mr. Pullen come back to close this out, but I just want to remind everyone that there is literature outside the doors, and you can get in contact with any of our panelists. And I just encourage you, kind of echoing what Jean said, you know, don't let it slip away. Your eyes and your hearts have been opened tonight, and I challenge you to be honest. See what you really see. Feel what you really feel. And that might involve seeing some things that are very uncomfortable to us. And again, demand is what drives this, the money. And that means we need to have open eyes about the reality of that. Who are the customers and where do they fit into our community? So with that, Mr. Pullen, I'm going to have you come up.
Thank you, Terry, and I want to give a big round of applause to the panel. Thank you. It's my opinion that the police, the state's attorney, and the government officials can and will reduce the numbers of the victims of this terrible scourge, but they need our help and our support, as do the victims. Make sure you take with you the 40 things that you can do that's part of the programs, and I noticed that some people didn't sit where programs are. There's a number of programs that are still available on the seats. Make sure you get one. You may note that they include such things as contacting your legislators and public officials to express your concerns and your support. Believe it or not, they appreciate such contact. It gives them leverage and power to accomplish things that are shown to be important to large numbers of people. And I respectfully suggest that you will appreciate the feeling that you will get that you've helped people and contributed to your community. Thank you all for coming.